Welcome, everybody. My name is Natasha Kathari. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Assistant Director of Admissions at Clark University. I'm going to be your host for today's session, which focuses on undergraduate research at Clark. This event is part of a series of webinars that we are doing exclusively for admitted students and their families. So if you're watching this, congratulations again. I am joined tonight by three wonderful panelists: Professor Neva Meyer, an assistant professor of biology; Donna Curry, the Senior Executive Director of the Career Connections Center; and Luke Pound, a junior studying psychology with minors in political science and comparative literature. I'll have them tell you a little bit more about themselves and their experiences in just a moment, but first I want to offer a couple of guidelines for how we're going to be using technology during this session. So first, you'll notice that we have both a Q&A feature and a chat feature. These two features have different functions. If you'd like to ask our panelists a question, please use the Q&A feature, and you can do that at any point during this webinar. And then if you're having an issue with the technology that we're using today, please use the chat feature. So that's the one that a few of you folks use to help us test our technology. So again, questions in the Q&A, technology issues and snack preferences go in the chat. After you submit your question, you might not see it right away. In order to ensure that as many audience members as possible can get their questions answered, we're going to be queuing them up one at a time. We will answer some questions on air and some via text. And since there are several of you tuning in right now, I would like to apologize in advance if we don't make it to your question. If we are unable to get to your question during this webinar, or if you think of other questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us at admissions@clarku.edu. And that email address will pop up on the screen towards the end of our session as well. All right, let's get started. So as I mentioned earlier, we have three panelists here this evening. And so that you have an idea of what their roles at Clark are and the types of questions that they might be able to answer, I would like to have each of them tell you a little more about themselves and the many, many hats that they wear at Clark University. So Professor Meyer, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. So I've been at Clark since fall 2011. I got my tenure after maybe about 6 years at Clark, and I teach a couple different classes: neuroscience, physiology, evolutionary developmental biology, and developmental biology. And sort of my field of interest, or my research field, is in this field called evolutionary developmental biology. And what that means is basically we try to understand how animals evolved, and we look at development, which is basically going from a single cell to a fully functional adult. And so we actually, I'll tell you more about my research later, but that's sort of the field that I'm in.
All right, thank you, Professor Meyer. Donna, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Curry. I've been at Clark for just over 4 years, and I support the Career Connections Center, which has a number of key resources and friendly and knowledgeable staff to support and advise you students as you connect what you're learning to what you're discovering about yourself, your goals, your passions, and what you plan to do after Clark. What I love most about my job is actually connecting our students with our alumni. And we do that by using a platform that virtually connects them with Clarkies who were in your shoes and are doing great things in the world these days.
I love that platform. Donna, I believe you're talking about Clark Connect, which is a fabulous resource for Clarkies. Thank you for sharing that. And Luke, welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Pound, and I'm a current junior here at Clark studying psychology. So I do a lot of research within my major of psychology, which I will delve into a bit later. But my general focus is psycholinguistics within psychology. As far as other extracurriculars, though, I am the co-captain of the salsa team on campus, Salsa and Sandita, and I'm also an actor and playwright for the Clark University Players Society.
Thank you for sharing that. So we'll go ahead and get started talking about research at Clark. Many people know that Clark is a liberal arts university, which is absolutely true, but we are also a research university. Actually, all tenure track faculty members at Clark produce research or creative work, and our award-winning curriculum, which you might know as LEAP, or Liberal Education and Effective Practice, makes experiential learning the basis of every Clarkie's educational experience. Furthermore, about 60% of Clark undergraduates engage in formal research. So this is a really, really big part of Clarkie culture, if you will. And some students, like Luke, even double dip in research. So Luke is actually involved in 2 different research projects right now. Luke, can you give us an overview of each of your current projects?
Yes, I can. So the 2 projects that I am currently working on are one with a research lab under Professor Esposito, who you can see there, and another one that's more of an independent research project that I'm working on with Professor Andrew Stewart. So with Professor Esposito, I've been a research assistant in her language learning and cognition lab for the past year. Research in that lab focuses on all aspects of, well, language learning and cognition, but I am specifically a member of the bilingual team. The bilingual team focuses specifically on bilingual education as it is practiced both in specifically Worcester Public Schools as well as the entire country. Research initially started with us going into classrooms, observing bilingual teaching environments and taking note of what language teachers would use in what contexts, developing a coding system to help analyze that, and then taking some preliminary data. However, once the pandemic came about a year ago, we had to switch our focus, and instead we developed interviews to direct at teachers, students, and parents who were involved with the program in order to get a bit more of a nuanced perspective on the bilingual education programs to help improve them in the future. And then the other project that I've been working on with Professor Stewart, I actually started as a first year. It was a project I started in my first year intensive course, which I took with Professor Stewart, which was called The Psychology of Prejudice. And for the final project of that course, I wanted to really dig deep and actually do a legitimate study. So I did an anonymous survey examining the impact of the etymology of our vocabulary on stereotypes that we form about other people. So that smaller project that I started as a first year ended up growing over time, and I got funding this past summer through a LEAP fellowship in order to get much more participants for the study, do another round of the study, and do further analysis. And I'm currently in the midst of continuing analysis of that project, and hopefully we'll be able to publish that data in the future.
That is super cool to have something that you started in your first year come to fruition now. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Luke. Thanks for sharing. I do want to actually take you back to your first year and just kind of generally walk down memory lane with you. So I guess you've already discussed how you got involved with your research with Professor Stewart. Could you share with us how you got involved with your research with Professor Esposito? And then for both of the research projects that you're working on, what resources you took advantage of in connecting with those opportunities, and also if there were people who were helpful to you as you found those?
Yeah, sure. So with getting connected with Professor Esposito, was a lot about just talking about my interests with psychology professors that I had, but also with Professor Stewart, who, as my FYI professor, was my de facto academic advisor. And then when I declared my major in psychology, I made him my official academic advisor. But when I was expressing my interest in language, he pointed me in the direction of Professor Esposito and said, well, maybe you would be interested in talking to her. That was a first year. I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm like ready to just start shooting emails to all the professors in this department. But as I formed connections with my peers within the department, I ended up finding friends that were in Professor Esposito's lab. Well, it's kind of interesting how these things become connected. Other members of the salsa team, which tends to be a very bilingual club on campus, were actually recommending that, like, if I'm interested in psychology of language, some of them were also psychology majors and bilingual, which is why they're on the bilingual team. Maybe I would be interested. And the undergraduate psychology council actually held an event where you could go to and kind of shadow the labs of a lot of professors. So Professor Esposito was one of the labs that I shadowed because it had been recommended to me. Professor Stewart had told me maybe I should talk to her. So I went to that lab and I loved all the research that they were doing. But I was like, oh, but it's a shame because I need to get another year's worth of credits in order to get in. But then when the deadline passed, she actually reached out to us and said, oh, me and a few others that had shadowed, and was like, why didn't you apply? And we were like, well, we don't have the requirements yet for this lab. And she was like, oh, no, that's fine. I've talked to you. It's very obvious that you know what you're doing. So that was how I ended up getting connected with Professor Esposito and working with her more. So that was the question of getting involved in Professor Esposito's lab. What was the next part of the question?
Just, what resources generally you took advantage of, people who were helpful to you.
Right. I did name a few of those resources already, but I think it's also worth pointing out that well, I suppose two things. One, that as my advisor, Professor Stewart has definitely been the center of helping me figure out where I need to focus my energy in order to get connected with these projects. And on top of that, also the Office of Prestigious Fellowships, where I applied in order to get the LEAP Fellowship in order to continue to do research, was very helpful in helping me put together a proposal in order to figure out exactly what I was going to do and help continue to focus on my research. But even just professors in general within the psychology department have been very helpful in helping me figure out what my direction is as I've taken their classes and discussed their own research with them and discussed their methods. So.
One thing that I want to highlight from what you mentioned, Luke, is just how much personal attention is available at Clark. I know that Donna's going to elaborate on this in a little while, but that Office of Prestigious Fellowships that you mentioned is part of the LEAP Student Success Network, along with the Career Connections Center. And this is essentially, a one-stop advising hub for all of our students, along with the academic advising that they get through their first year intensive and through their major or majors. And so every step of the way during your time at Clark University, you have people who know you well, who are rooting for you, who are willing to, send that email and say, hey, how come you didn't apply to my lab? And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So last question for you, Luke. As you continue your research with Professor Esposito, I know you have said in the past that you're doing an honors thesis. What is that? And what are you planning for yours?
What an excellent question, Natasha. Yes, within the psychology department, I should have mentioned previously, the psychology major has a research requirement as part of the entire major track, and I decided to do Professor Esposito's lab as part of that requirement, but also to wrap it all up at the end of the major, you have the option to either do capstone research or take a capstone course, which is kind of like a seminar that really wraps everything up for the psychology major and helps you kind of figure out what your next steps are. Or you can do an honors thesis, which instead of one semester is 2 semesters long. And it is an independent research project that you do where you really dig deep into a particular topic or thesis, particular focus. So in my case, I'm actually doing my honors thesis a semester early. I'm starting next spring instead of the normal starting in the fall and finishing in the spring of your senior year. So I'm starting in the spring as a junior, which is a little scary, I have to admit. But since starting in Professor Esposito's lab my first semester of sophomore year, I've actually worked with her a lot. I think actually even the times when I wasn't working in her lab, I was a peer learning assistant for her first year intensive last semester, which was psychology of bilingualism. Something that after being in her lab, I was very familiar with. So as I'm moving into the spring, I'm going to be talking, I've already been talking to her over the past year about ideas for my honors thesis. But I know that I want it to be psycholinguistics, but I'm particularly interested in how words impact as well as constrain our thought. There are a lot of very popular linguistic theories that talk about how language constrains thought. Um, but it's much more nuanced than that. And I'd like to focus very specifically on how particular types of vocabulary as well as particular varieties of English as well as pronouns impact our thought. So that's what I'd like my honors thesis to be, and I'll start planning that next semester.
Well, hey, it sounds like you're getting an early start on it, which is very exciting, even if, as you mentioned, it can be a little bit scary. Best of luck as you begin your work on that, Luke, and thank you for sharing a little bit about your research. Next, I'm going to move on to Professor Meyer, who's going to share a little bit about her research interests and about how students can get involved in research at Clark. Hi, Professor Meyer.
Hi. And I did shut the door, but the cat unlatched it, so she came in anyway.
We love cats. Any animals just make webinars, I think, a zillion times better. So thank you to your cat. Welcome to your cat. So my first question for you, Professor Meyer, is just, generally about your research. I know that you do research on the evolution of nervous systems. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and also what we're looking at here on this slide?
So these are just supposed to be some fun images. We're not going to go into them in too much detail, but on the top left is sort of a developmental sequence. So a 4-cell embryo, a little swimming larva, so with the little 2 orange eye spots, and then a worm. So I study annelids that live in the ocean, and we try to understand how they make their brains and their nerve cords. So we do lots of different things. We mess around with things under microscopes. We do a lot of imaging. We do sort of functional stuff. So we mess around with genes. We've been kind of getting into the genomics and transcriptomics landscape, which is really hot right now. So we've been sequencing a lot of things to try to understand how things are developing. So it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot for everyone. There's things that are very hands-on. So I have a student right now who's really into art and loves doing things with her hands. And she's doing something that's called blastomere isolations, which takes really fine work under a microscope. There are things for people who really like computational stuff. So which is great during the COVID pandemic because they're doing their projects online. But there's a lot of different types of things to do in our lab, but all of it sort of looks at how brains form in worms, basically.
I love that you kind of look at what different students in your lab are interested in or what their strengths are outside of biology and try to incorporate that into their work. So on that note, I do want to talk a little bit about your lab group. I know you have undergraduates, masters, PhD students, postdoctoral students. How do undergraduates get involved in your research, and what types of responsibilities do they typically take on?
So I advise a lot of students also that are interested in research. And so there's a lot of different avenues to get into research labs in the STEM. I would say you can just email professors. So you can look on the web page for the biology department, for example, at Clark University, and we each have a research profile. So I tell students if they find something that sort of grabs their attention to email that person. I've had students who've taken classes with me where they are really interested in something that I was teaching, and they said, hey, could I try this in your lab? So I've had students who've actually gone all the way from an undergrad and then done the 5th-year master's program and gotten their master's degree. So they've actually been in my lab for 4 years straight. And that was based on taking a class and liking something and wanting to try something out. I also tell students that you can, take classes with professors if you want to get into their research groups, email them. I mean, really sort of anything goes. And I've had as many as 11 undergraduates in a semester in my research group. Usually each person has an independent project, so they have their own hypothesis, they're doing all their own project, and usually they fit together. So one undergraduate project is usually not enough for a paper in my field, but they would all go together to be a publishable work. Students present their research at meetings, so I send students to regional meetings, I've sent students to national meetings, so across the country, to present their research. And we try to do a lot of outreach as well. I know you'll get to that in a second, but we kind of do all sorts of things. And I really try to tailor my approach to what each person is trying to get out of their time at Clark. So people may actually want to go on and get a PhD. And so that might be one set of, track or whatever. But other people really just kind of want to see what it's like to do research. And so they might have a different type of project. And usually the projects all sort of synergize in the lab, and we have sort of group meetings every week. We do a lot of stuff together. Yeah, I think that answers it, sort of, maybe.
That answers it perfectly. And I love that you already mentioned that your lab also gets involved in the community, because I think that that is such a Clarky thing, to take this enthusiasm for inquiry out into beyond campus. So I want to ask you about that. Can you tell us about what we're seeing on this slide and about the Eureka program?
Yeah, so one of the things that really attracted me to Clark, both were strong research combined with strong undergraduate education, but also strong involvement in the community, which was really important to me. And so we do multiple things in my lab to try to get involved in the community. We work with this, with the Girls Inc. in this Eureka program, along with other professors at Clark too, so not just my lab. And we do lots of different things with local middle school girls. And basically we will collect pond samples, label them with different fluorescent labels, look at them under like really high powered microscopes, kind of have fun. We test, the effects of oil on larval development of different animals, all sorts of different fun things every year. But what's cool is that the undergrads actually in my lab help me develop the modules, and then we all run them together. And I'm actually working on another program with the Worcester schools that would have undergraduate interns, paid internships, hopefully, where undergrads who are interested in this sort of outreach STEM mentoring could work with grade school and middle school kids in Worcester.
That is such a special initiative. Thank you so much for sharing that, Professor Meyer. I think that one of the most exciting things about sessions like this one is getting to imagine the possibilities for what you could do as a college student, what your life would be like, or what things you might get involved in. That said, I do want to acknowledge that sometimes it can be tough to know exactly where to start. I mean, we've talked about point B, but how do you get there? What's point A? I do appreciate that both Luke and Professor Meyer shared some information about what getting involved in undergraduate research at Clark can look like. And next, I'm thrilled to have Donna Curry here from the Career Connections Center to share more about the support that our students receive when looking for research opportunities. Hi, Donna. How's it going?
Hi, Natasha. How are you? So I have a dog meandering in my background here, so we might have a cat and dog montage.
Oh, fantastic. I wish my dog were nearby so we could add more animals. We love to see it. So Donna, my first question for you is kind of about what you do. What is the Career Connections Center?
Sure. So we are indeed part of the LEAP Student Success Network. And once you get to Clark, you'll learn all our acronyms. So the Career Connection Center, we affectionately call the CCC. And we're a hub, really, simply put, for undergraduate career services. We bring together staff from 5 offices, and those 5 offices include career development. So kind of that starting point. How do I start? Where do I start? Employer engagement. So that's building pipelines for research opportunities and internships and entry-level jobs upon graduation. We also have our student employment office, opportunity funding, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and our Clark Connect office, which I mentioned earlier, which is a really important part of the Clark culture, connecting students with our alumni community for relationships that start at Clark and never end. We offer a suite of resources for students, and it covers the range from advising, mentoring, figuring out how to apply for opportunities or what opportunities to apply, and some programming for really any stage of where a student might be in their career development and preparation. Lastly, I'll just say that our career advising model is to help students clarify what life after Clark path they're going to pursue and to develop a general strategy for moving forward. That's not to say when you arrive at Clark, you know what you're going to do, but we help you ask some of the questions that you might not know what to ask or when to ask, and just help guide and prompt you along the way. And finally, our career advisors are actually organized by academic disciplines and departments. And that works really well in our Clark ecosystem. So I could talk to Neva about opportunities. I can talk to her department. We do presentations to the faculty. So we're really trying to build bridges in this ecosystem, and we're not siloed. We know, or we try to learn what one another is doing so that we can really be intentional about how we advise students and where we advise them to, because we might not know all of the answers, but we want to know where to direct students and what questions to ask next.
Thank you for sharing that, Donna. I think that it's wonderful how holistic the Career Connection Center is in terms of their approach. That, I mean, you could be a student who knows exactly what you want to do and get the help you need. You could be a student who, like you said, has no clue and make an appointment and still get the help that you didn't even know you needed. So it's definitely a really special set of offices that we have available at Clark. So now I do want to zoom in just a little bit to undergraduate research specifically. What support does your office offer to students interested in research?
Sure. So just kind of going along the theme, we do work with students at any stage pursuing research opportunities. So that could be the question mark of how do I start? Or I know what I want to do. How do I find it and get funding for it, or start a conversation with a faculty member on campus, or perhaps it's elsewhere. So to give you an example, we work with students preparing and crafting their materials. That could be their resumes or CVs. We can help students apply for funding for opportunities. And that preparation would be asking questions about, do you have clear goals? Do you have all the necessary components to complete the research that you're interested in? What's your why? Does this project match with your academic and career goals? So we really want to be intentional about what are you doing, why are you doing it, and how can we support you in doing that? We leverage our alumni and parent network to source meaningful opportunities for Clark students. And we have a number of examples of those successful relationships. And one I'll mention is a student who was from the Bahamas and actually ended up interning at the Johnson Comprehensive Center for Cancer at UCLA. And that was facilitated largely by an alumni connection. We're also building relationships in our backyard. The biotech sector is growing hand over fist in Massachusetts. So we're working to cultivate relationships there for our students in biology, chemistry, biochem, molecular biology, and other STEM fields. So a lot, from soup to nuts.
Donna, it sounds like you guys are keeping pretty busy. That's wonderful.
Gladly so.
Wow. So finally, what funding opportunities are available to students interested in research at Clark?
Sure. So, our goal with funding is to make opportunities for academic growth and career development more financially accessible for our students. So the CCC administers funding opportunities for a number of opportunities that fall into three categories, if you will: research, creative projects, and internships. So I can give you a sampling of some of the funding opportunities that we do have available. So there's a fund named after Mr. Steinbrecher, the Steinbrecher Fellowship Program. And this fund funds original ideas, creative research, public service, or enrichment projects. In contrast, we have the Edwin Weiler Summer Fellowship Program. And this fund supports students pursuing research in biology, chemistry, biochem, physics, or environmental sciences under the supervision of a Clark faculty member. And just to give you another sense of the scope of discipline and breadth of research, the Harrington Fellowship Fund provides funding for research on politics, public policy, conferences, and service projects. And finally, I'll just share the Tamara Gay Walker. This fund supports projects that lie in languages, comparative literature, and the arts. So why I'm sharing this range of projects or funding for opportunities is because one size doesn't fit all. And our students have insatiable curiosity. And they often won't go down one track. As you can see, Luke in his research, it's been multiplied. And so that's what we want to be able to provide students with access to funding so that they can pursue these opportunities.
Donna, I love that you are emphasizing access and research, because I always say that one of the biggest differences between Clark and other institutions is that gulf between what you can do in college and what you actually will do. There are lots of institutions that offer cool out of the classroom opportunities, but Clark is a place where, because of the personal attention the students get from day one, because of the funding available, because of the emphasis that we place on experiential learning, you actually get to take advantage of those experiences. So things like the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, 60% of our students do undergraduate research. Those things aren't accidents. I mean, that's something that happens very intentionally at Clark University. So thank you, Donna, for sharing that. Thank you, Professor Meyer, and thank you, Luke, for all the insight that you've shared so far. And for those of you who are tuning in, we are ready to answer your questions. So if you haven't already posted a question in the Q&A, feel free to do so now. Again, just a reminder, the chat we'll use for technological issues, and then if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. I will go ahead and get started with a question while all of you are getting warmed up. I am curious to know a little more about the advising relationship and how that helps with research. So Luke, you talked about this a little bit earlier with how Professor Stewart connected you with Professor Esposito. Professor Meyer, let's get a different perspective on this. Let's see, you mentioned that you advise students who are simply interested in research, even if they aren't in your lab. So can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, I try to help them find opportunities to do research that, fit their needs or interests. And so that might be another faculty member in the biology or the STEM departments. That might be at UMass Medical School, for example. So I've sponsored multiple students who have done research projects. Sometimes I've had students do research projects in my lab while also doing a research project at UMass Med, because they were interested in going on in biotech, right? So they wanted some of the hands-on experience in my lab, but they wanted more sort of biomedical research experience too. I have students who've shadowed vets that these are all academic internships, but I also try to help students find summer research programs. So Clark has a summer research program for STEM, but sometimes students have very specific interests, and so I try to help them find REU programs or other programs that would help fit their goals, basically. So again, I think it really is true that taking a sort of hands-on tailored approach to people as individuals and helping them.
Thank you for sharing that, Professor Meyer. We do have our first audience question, which is specifically about environmental science. So I could use help from anyone who works with students in environmental science or knows someone in environmental science. Examples of research opportunities and internships in that area.
I don't know if Donna wants to take this, or there are definitely, so we have people in multiple departments at Clark who are doing environmental science research. There are fellowships. So we have an environmental science major, and yeah, I don't know. I'm not part of that major, so I'm not going to be the best at advising.
Yeah, I will note that we actually funded quite a few students in environmental science last year, summer actually, who had to pivot similarly to Luke, given COVID. So thinking about how they might do their research, not in the field and more surveying, but that is a growing area of interest among our students, and we are actively building out our network connections and opportunities specifically for that experiential type learning capacity.
And I am actually pulling up the environmental science faculty page and posting that in the chat. So then if you want to look at what faculty in that area are researching specifically, you can do so. As I said earlier, all of our tenure line faculty are doing research. So there are tons of opportunities in every field available at Clark. Our next question, I'll turn this one over to Luke, since you have the student perspective. Do students select which professors will help with their research, or are they selected for them?
So it depends a bit on what kind of research you end up doing. If you are participating as a research assistant in a lab, then you oftentimes apply to whatever lab you would like to do, which already has a professor or two, or maybe even three, that are leading the main research within within that group. However, if you're doing some kind of independent research, as I have, you very much get to choose which professor you would like to work with, but that often coincides with, what you want to study. I'm working with Professor Zito on my honors thesis because she has the most experience by far when it comes to psycholinguistics. She studies language and cognition and development, so she can provide that perspective and help me develop my research as somebody who's already familiar with the literature, already familiar with the science. And oftentimes you will have already worked with the professor when you ask them, hey, can you please be the sponsor for my honors thesis? Of course, you ask, you do not simply just choose the professor. You usually have a few conversations with them, see if they're available to help you out. But yes, but like labs, there's a professor already leading the lab. Research courses, you can choose which research course you would like to take and which professor you'd like to take it with. And then capstone research, you will often work with a professor you've possibly worked with before. So that's at least the case in the psychology department. I'll say that much.
That's very helpful, Luke. Thank you. And on that note, it sounds like, Luke, you started some degree of research activity during your first year at Clark, but more broadly, and this is a question for anyone who wants to take it, how early do students typically start doing research, and how early can they start doing research?
Right from the beginning. Students typically, I would say, for the STEM often start in their second year, but definitely quite a few students start in their first year. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Professor Meyer. And my next question is for Donna. So Donna, you mentioned that with a lot of the biotech companies that are popping up in the area, there are lots of local partnerships that your office is working on building. Can you talk more generally about some of the local research opportunities and partnerships, and even outside of research, internships and the like, that your office has developed for students?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our approach is local and global. So we want to create an array of opportunities for students. So there are local companies, but there are also local global companies. So so we often will work to see if we have alumni represented working at those institutions, organizations, and work with them to provide students an opportunity to learn about those organizations and what kind of work happens in those organizations. So you could be interested in biotech, but be doing more analysis than research, or you might be more operational and marketing than diagnostics. So we have, so for example, we have a program called the Alumni Job Shadow Program, and that pairs students with alumni who act as hosts at their organizations. And this provides an opportunity for students to do some exploration and discovery to figure out what they might be interested in, or confirm or affirm things that they thought they were interested in. And so we've had a number of alumni host students at organizations that would fall under the realm of STEM, if you will. And I'm not sure if I'm answering that question, but I would say we have a network of connections and opportunities, both local and global, and many of them are generated through our alumni network.
I think you answered that perfectly, Donna. Thank you. I mean, I am perpetually just amazed at how engaged our alumni are, how ready they are to go to bat for our students. And I think that, a lot of that is the work of your office, that it takes a lot of effort to, make that connection, even if people on both sides, students and alumni, are willing. And so thank you for everything that you do to support students. I do have a question kind of going off of what you said earlier, Donna, about the why, how it's important to find your why. And this question is going to go to Luke. Why do you do research as an undergraduate student? How do you feel it's made you grow?
I do research because I want to figure out what my field is, and what I will end up doing in the future, right? Like, I don't necessarily want, I did not want my learning experience to be, just sitting in a classroom and going over the things that I will end up doing in a few years, but I don't have to worry about that yet, right? I wanted to really be able to get in there and really figure things out. Which I have to say, getting the chance to do that in undergrad is very nice, because it means that I can mess up, and it means that I have a professor, or a head of a lab that will say maybe that code might not necessarily work because of this knowledge that I have gained by working in this field for 20 years that you don't have yet because you've been in it for 2. And I think as a student it's really helped because I've been able to consistently readjust my own perspective on how I study psychology and what I want to study within the field, and it's really given direction to what I want to do.
Thank you for sharing that, Luke. That's really helpful perspective for our students who are wondering whether research is a good idea for them. I have one final question for all of you that can be related to research, doesn't have to be, but all of us, whether faculty, staff, current students, do in some way consider Clark our home. So for each of you, I'm curious to know what makes Clark feel like home for you.
I'll say for me, it's a very warm, welcoming community. I really enjoy all of the people that I work with and the students that I interact with and the staff. And I enjoy interacting with the local community as well, that's sort of outside of Clark. So it's all together, and I think everybody is sort of very supportive.
Yeah, I would echo Professor Meyer, and it's the people. Even virtually, if I thought it's amazing how connected I feel even virtually with my people at Clark, and the fact that the students have adapted and adjusted and are now participating virtually in these conversations that we thought could only happen in the office. So it's the people, it's the caring, and the willingness to try and pivot and adapt, whether in person or virtually. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, I have to say, for me, I feel like everyone has like their own version of like saying, community. I think community is a huge thing for all of us at Clark, but I think one particular thing that I think makes Clark feel like home is trying to get from point A to point B, which like should only take 5 minutes, but like you keep running into people that you know when you're just trying to, get to the other side of campus or get to the fourth floor of the library. But it's always nice to be able to run into somebody and talk to them, or now everyone's been trying to keep that up by reaching out virtually as well. But I just really appreciate that about the community.
Well, I'm hardly original here in saying that I too love the Clark community, but I will say that the warmth of it can't be overstated. My first day working at Clark, I didn't really know my way around campus and decided to take a walk over my lunch break to, kind of get the lay of the land. And I must have looked lost because within my first 15 minutes, 3 different people, complete strangers, asked if I needed help. Like, this is not just a place where people are conventionally polite. That's absolutely true. But this is also a place where people really look out for each other, even if they're looking out for complete strangers. So that warmth is something that is genuinely palpable when you're on campus and when you're virtual as well. So thank you again to our wonderful panelists, Professor Meyer, Donna, Luke. It's been such a pleasure to hear from you as you share your expertise. And thank you to those of you who are tuning in for taking the time to join us. As we continue to celebrate our admitted students and their families, we are excited to offer more webinars. Next Tuesday, February 23rd, please join us at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for an admitted student meetup. This is your chance to mingle with current Clarkies and future classmates. And also be sure to check our admitted student site, which is on your screen, clarku.edu/admitted, as we are continuing to announce events. As always, if you have any more questions for us or even just want to say hi, please do feel free to email us at admissions@clarku.edu. Thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. We've had a lot of fun answering your questions and hope that you'll get in touch if we can help with anything. Until next time, have fun, stay safe, and stay well. Bye, everybody.